Good morning, everyone. This is our online event, Design in the Non-Material World. My name is Katja Lindroos and I am the project manager of Finnish Design Info, and I have the pleasure to host this event that we're going to have today about sustainable transition. What does it mean when we have to actually do with much less stuff? How does design, how does fashion and architecture have to change? So just a few words about Finnish Design Info, who is today indeed the organizing party. This is actually at the moment a project that was initiated in 2020 by 6 leading Finnish design organizations. And their shared goal was to create a new form of collaboration that would enable more effective promotion of Finnish design, but also, and most importantly, really to create more discussion around design. And I'm happy to tell that this project phase has been very fruitful. So this year we have formed an association with 4 founding members: Design Forum, Design Museum, Ornamo, the Association of Finnish Designers, and Grafia. So this new association will start its operation next year. So if you are interested in staying up to date, go to our website, you can subscribe to our newsletter, and you will for sure get more info on that. But Finnish Design Info is not today our main topic. Our main topic is the sustainable transition. And we believe that sustainability requires more collaboration. We can't do things in isolation. One by one, we have to really focus on the connection between parties. And this event on itself is actually a manifestation of collaboration. We're collaborating together with Arkinfo Finland and Fashion Finland on this, because what we now need is more cross-disciplinary discussion, right? So we need really to understand design as a very holistic approach. But now I think you are probably thinking, what is this location where we are in? What is the dungeon she's speaking from? The dungeon is at Finnish Design, in Design Museum, and this place is now hosting a fantastic exhibition called What If, and explores the alternative futures. And this is also a collaborative effort. So I will now inviting here Mikko Duva from Sitra to tell a bit about the process and behind this exhibition. So you're working in Sitra, so can you tell a little bit, what are you doing there?
Well, my work involves thinking about alternative futures from the Finnish society's point of view. So this includes thinking about what is happening now, what are the key trends. We have a trend report coming out this January, but also at looking at more kind of surprising things, signals of emerging change, etc. And this exhibition is very much about these weak signals.
And why is Sitra investing in the understanding of weak signals? Why is it important for the whole society?
Well, we believe, along with a lot of futures researchers, that we are now in these post-normal times of surprises. And I think this resonates well if you think about the last 2 years and what has been happening. We are in times where surprises are kind of the new normal. But of course, so we can't kind of think that the future is just the continuation of the present. We need to think about, challenge our mindset, think about alternative futures. And weak signals are one tool to do that, to really kind of broaden our idea of what the future could be. Right.
And if you can tell a little bit about the process behind this exhibition. So this is really the space is, first of all, it's beautiful, beautifully designed, but most importantly, it's packed with insights and with provocations. So what was the process in setting this up?
So this exhibition is partly based on our weak signals work and weak signal report that we published last January. But we wanted to kind of, you can only do so much with the report. We wanted to somehow bring these different ideas to life and make futures more kind of something that you can experience alternative ideas about futures. So we had a bunch of workshops open to everyone, where we kind of explored these ideas. There was a large range of different stakeholders there, and then we commissioned 6 or actually 7 artists and designers to do the final pieces that you see here.
Yep.
And they participated in the workshops. They observed, gained ideas from that, and then we also had very much kind of discussion and interaction with them, and of course with design museum people and Sitra people and the artists, and so that is what you kind of see here.
Exactly. So it materializes a lot of the ideas of the report, but actually brings also something new.
Yes.
When you think about you have set this report up, and then following this process, did it bring any new findings, any surprises that came out of this exhibition process?
Well, I think that the report is meant to be kind of a conversation starter or enhancer. It's not kind of the final words. So I was really pleased to see how these ideas grew and shifted, and for example, if the participants had one idea in the workshop, and then the artist took it into another way, direction, etc. I was also very kind of intrigued by how personal many of these final pieces became to the artist, and helped them also to reflect kind of their ideas about future. And this is really what this is all about, to really help people think about futures in more kind of deep way.
Yeah. So also the humane aspect of it, we often think about that. To think about future, we have to have some kind of futuristic skills. But what you're actually saying is that we all can participate in setting out those ideas, and we have even here, I was reading a little bit, what if have people suggested that the world could be like. So we have now the topic, which is the design in the non-material world, which is also very much a conversation starter. We think that the sustainable transition, that will mean that we have to really do more, like much more with less resources, will fundamentally change how we are producing services, objects, anything that we so-called design. So how do you, as a future forecaster, interpret that idea of future? What is future design, and what this idea of non-materiality mean?
Well, as you said, we are in a time of huge transformation, and I think and I really hope that design has a huge role to play in not just kind of thinking about the material objects, but really thinking about the way we do things, and what could be a more sustainable, more kind of a way of enhancing also the kind of the social capital, ecological capital, etc. So I think design is key in this transformation.
Yes. So we have to basically redesign the whole flow of how we create value also, and an idea of what means better. A better society, and thank you so much, Mikko, for being here, and thank you so much for being part of this fantastic exhibition. And I'm very happy to say that you have a lot of time still to see it, so please do not miss it. It's open here till I think March the 12th next year. So what if exhibition, Alternative Futures. And I let you continue with your endeavors to the future.
Thank you.
And I have now the pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. When we were setting up this event in collaboration with Arkinfo and Fashion Finland, we were thinking very much about what is often the missing factor when we talk about sustainable transition. We often talk about legislation, we might talk about EU, about state, and all kinds of things. And the missing factor is very often us people. Where do the consumers come in? Where do our decisions come in? And how do we create more understanding of motivations? And this is why we were very, very inspired by the research that was initiated partly by Design Forum Finland and funded by Sitra, Stuff in Flux, and conducted by Alice Labs. And there are some really essential findings about how consumers' attitudes are changing. This is an international study. So this looks at a very broad spectrum of behavior change. And we're so lucky to have here actually the person who has been running the research. So we don't have now so many people here to applaud, but anyway, please help me to introduce you to Oskar Korkan from Alice Labs and share your insights on what you found in this study. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. No, I'm very happy to be here, and as was mentioned, I'm really going to talk about the shifts in consumer society and consumerism, and that's really what I'm passionate about. So I've been spending the last 15 years in really trying to understand how people's behaviors are changing globally. And the starting point wasn't really sustainability or circularity, but that's kind of where we are kind of ending up, because that is where the kind of emerging demand is placed in one way. And I love the heading of this event, because that's really what I'm passionate about, this how is the relationship between people and materials changing. So that's really going to be the focus of this talk. So as mentioned, there has been a project that is called Stuff in Flux, and that was actually, now we have presented the second chapter of this research. This was actually a study that was started already in 2016. So we have also both qualitative and quantitative data to kind of almost see movements in society also through this specific research. And although I'm having done this myself and so on, it's hugely inspiring, because I think sometimes we paint a picture of a very gloomy kind of a situation from a consumerist point of view, and we're very kind of skeptical about the demand, how it's forming and so on. I think when we take a broader picture and really seeing how lifestyles are changing, how attitudes and values and behaviors are changing, I think there are reasons to be more optimistic. The problem is actually, in my mind, more on the supply side. So we shouldn't use that as an excuse anymore to say that the consumer is not ready, or consumer is not ready to pay for sustainable solutions and so on. That's crap. That's not true. So anyway, I will talk a little bit about this study and what we are seeing. So what we are seeing is globally, and now we're talking really globally. So we are including China, South America, and Southeast Asia in a broader perspective, Europe and US and so on. We are seeing a movement towards something that we call a movement towards a sufficiency paradigm. And what do we mean by that? We mean by that still in 2016, when we were doing this research, we saw that people were becoming more selective. There were like a longer decision-making process to decide what you want to own and what you want to have. But it was still like full consumerism. It was just a more selective version of consumerism. Now we see that people are really kind of ground up, kind of this kind of concern about the resources that we have is kind of reflected upon behaviors of consumption in a very broad way, but in a way that is not always expected, and in a way that doesn't necessarily always have the labels that we are using when we are talking about this. So consumers might not talk, for instance, about sustainability. They might talk about longevity instead, or better quality and so on. And that's really the point of my presentation, is that as we are developing demand, we need to be sensitive to this language. We need to be sensitive of what are really these offerings that can be successful in the future. This is not about reduction. That's very important. So that's bad marketing, saying that you will have less, especially for a new generation that is otherwise in so many different ways having really a tough time. We can't have a promise about less. We can have a promise about a different form of consumption that is more in some ways, but it's less on the material side. So the fact that you are getting more from consumption doesn't always need to mean that you are using more virgin resources, as an example. So you can have promises about joyful promises about more and so on, but doing that in a sufficient way. So it's not about the quantity of materials. It's also need to be new forms of aspiration, where I can't like paint the gloomy. And I almost feel that's kind of a responsibility of us right now, to develop this kind of positive future that is a much more sustainable way forward. And as I said, the problem is not demand. The demand is there, it's huge. The problem is there's a supply that is moving very, very slowly and cannot adapt to this new forming demand. In this study, we identified something which we call opportunity territories or opportunities areas. And these are what we have, and what I'm presenting here are 4 different areas of value which have global mass market potential. So this has nothing to do with weak signals, for instance. This is like actual demand in 4 different areas. The first area is something which we call useful stuff, which has all to do with longevity, the fact that things are only valuable when they are in use. People get less and less kicks from like buying more, they get more kicks from using more, which means that you need to get more out of the materials we have. And that's really the kind of a challenge now for anybody who is developing the supply. Materials need to be more formable, it needs to be more flexible, it needs to be more versatile, it needs to have more longevity. And the point is also that the brands needs to focus much more on the kind of a usage perspective. So people are expecting brands to be involved in giving them advice on how you can get more value out of what you have. The second area, which is kind of a little bit also probably reflected by the pandemic we have and so on, we have to remember that people people are consumers and people want to get joy out of it. But the challenge is that people don't want to have the joy that they feel guilty from. So it's really about that kind of guilt-free joy and elevation of people's everyday life. This is really much kind of addressing the kind of mental health crisis that we have also globally. So people also expect material things to kind of be elevating and take forward for them. The third area is something which is called stuff connecting to nature. And this is really about, and I think we have all seen this, that globally, we have gone through a transition of redefining our relationship to nature. I think still pre-pandemic, we were really kind of almost like, we might have liked like nature as a form of inspiration, or we kind of enjoyed nature. But I think the way we would like to see nature is a much more kind of regenerative approach and a more kind of almost like collaborative approach with nature. So we are not using nature, we are with nature, using almost nature as a form of technology that is very kind of efficient for us to do things that we have thought in very artificial ways before. And the fourth area is something which we call flowing stuff, which is, there's kind of nothing surprising with this area. Flowing stuff means that people are liking the idea that stuff is moving in the market. So basically secondhand and so on. People like the idea that you can be a temporary custodian of things. So I can own something, but it's not like, I don't have to feel that this is like the end point of everything. This is just like, I'm just a steward of this thing, and then it will move forward. This is what we call circular consumption. The most important thing here is that I haven't seen it before as a global demand. So that's the important thing here, that we can actually measure this demand. We can also see the explosive growth of the second-hand market. We can only imagine the new ways of doing, new forms of second-hand markets that are even more convenient and more fluent in how they are working. So those are the 4 areas, and I will just reflect a little bit still more on the Finnish perspective on this, because that was the point in the report that we wrote for Design Forum, funded by Sitra, was to contemplate about how should this change our way of thinking about design. But before going to those points, I will just show you a couple of examples, especially related to joyful stuff. I think in Finland also we really need to think in terms of starting the non-material in a digital sense, and how we can increasingly develop also offerings that have no material footprint. So there's a lot of discussion about digital fashion, the fact that you can start to wear digital garments in an online world, and so on. This is very kind of emergent, and it's kind of happening in a very fast pace in gaming worlds, with collectibles, with NFTs, and so on. But I think this is still like an area where we need to really start to look for dematerialization. So really thinking about that certain forms of digital consumption can replace physical consumption. So maybe in the future, in some kind of metaverse, we don't need that stuff. We need some kind of a basic utilities, and our expression can happen much more digitally. So then lastly, just a couple of reflections now when you kind of maybe have had some time to think about the 4 areas I was presenting earlier. Just a couple of thoughts about what does this mean from a Finnish perspective, like how can we think about that? So useful stuff. As we have seen it, I'm not a designer. I'm an external perspective looking at designers and design in Finland, is that I think this is the perfect extension of this kind of very functional and pragmatic and kind of simple way of thinking about usability. There's a very great tradition in Finland of thinking about usability of things and so on. I think this is just like an extension of that. Just think about usefulness rather than usability. How can we make things that are even more useful during their whole life cycle? Joyful stuff might be something that's a little bit more difficult for Finland. I don't think we have a tradition of being very joyful. We're kind of more in terms of let's make things really simple and useful. So there's always like a danger of making too much reduction in Finland. But here I think really the joyful stuff, we should really emphasize the digital aspects of how digital can be a world where things are evolving and changing all the time, and you are not necessarily creating as much of a footprint from consuming in the digital world. Stuff connecting to nature, new interpretation of nature. I will be a little bit bold here and say I think we are a little bit boring in our interpretations of nature. We are a little bit like we should look, because we have in Finland such a strong connection to nature, we should revisit that connection and think about it in new ways. And flowing stuff, it's a little bit almost like an extension of the useful stuff aspects where we should just think about that. What do we do when we design things not only for one consumer, but we're actually designing things for multiple users that come in a row? So that's kind of my thoughts on design in Finland, and based on which has been a massive body of research that we have done. So we have talked for hundreds and hundreds of hours with people around the globe, and studied thousands of them also quantitatively. So to summarize, the point I want to make here is that when we're talking, especially in Finland, when we talk about sustainability and circularity, I think we should see that as a foundation for a new logic of how business is being done in the future. It's not a value proposition in itself. It's not something that we are we are not selling sustainability and circularity. We need to find those aspirational offerings and value propositions based on our understanding of consumers. Thank you. I have no clue what the time was.
No, this is perfect. This is perfect. Thank you very much, Oscar. This is extremely important and topical also from the aspect that we are also in a certain way thinking very much in Finnish Design Info. What does Finnish design mean? And what should we actually, is it only promoting a certain idea of like what design is today, or can we even think about that we inspire people to rethink what Finnish design is? So this is very thought-provoking. We have here some questions, and indeed when you're following on YouTube you can add some questions to the chat. So we will, my colleague will point out that when there is something that is addressing to the speakers. Here is a very interesting and also quite a critical question. Who is we? Having to continue as is not suffer from, however, enjoy. Sounds a little bit privileged when you were pointing out the we. On that note, does consumerism of decades educated towards quality and utility? So this is I'm not entirely.
Which context did I use?
I think it has to do very much with consumerism in general and what you are looking at, and so. Do you have reflections?
No, I think I was using the context of like we should do things in order to kind of meet growing demand. So when I talk about we, I'm kind of seeing me as a part of an ecosystem in Finland that needs to start to think in new ways and develop new kinds of ways of driving better growth in the future. So I think I see myself as a consumer expert, as a part of an ecosystem where there are kind of designers and producers and so on. And when I use the we, especially in the Finnish case, I think there's such a strong kind of ecosystem with very kind of low barriers. So that's why I kind of like to talk about as we.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. This question is a little bit related to the thing that I was thinking about when you talk about indeed a very extensive research and really essential to get such insights. Did you notice clear differences? You have these categories of stuff. Yeah. And for example, now considering this last one, the flowing stuff, is there clearly certain, let's say, I don't like the word target groups, but anyway, the certain kind of segments or areas where it's emerging more? Yeah.
I think there's like geographical differences, and it has to do with, the thing is also that demand can only form when there is a supply. We have to remember that when we are talking about there needs to be a supply for somebody to actually have an idea about wanting something. So I think like in flowing stuff, for instance, and from all the qualitative research I have done during the years, like Germany, for instance, is clearly I think that's where innovation can happen, because people are very much has been for decades in a mindset of being kind of going against the idea about waste and kind of being very careful about how to do resources. I think we like to think that the Nordic countries is also advanced. I think we could be even much more advanced, thinking also about how small societies we have where I'm still a little bit disappointed that the public sector and the private sector cannot come even more together and just make things working like even better. So that's why I would like to say that Nordic countries, but I'm not going to say that just to be a little bit provocative. That then of course there are like other markets like US, which is really difficult to research because it's so diverse and kind of fragmented. But I think that like flowing stuff is clearly something that will come a little bit later in that market, except maybe for 4 cities in US.
Well, this is very important. I think very welcome also the challenge to put on us ourselves. You know, we have to start the improvement by looking critically what we are doing here ourselves, and also, as you mentioned, the word supply, which is sometimes indeed difficult because of like where does it start? What's the chicken and the egg? But indeed, supply is where also designers can really influence.
Yeah. And I would like to say one thing that about that still is that consumers' expectation is also the industrial scale. I think in 2016, these kind of were like a little bit these kind of communities, you know, in kind of certain parts, like in Berlin or in Helsinki, in some kind of hipster community, you might have like a market of some kind of a sharing economy and so on. I think the consumers globally are kind of seeing that is not really making any sort of difference. I mean, we can play around here in our very, very small sandbox, but that will not move the needle. So there is an expectation for industrial scale. And that's why I also work with the big global brands around the world, because I think those are the ones that need to really make the change as well, because they have that kind of power also to make the industrial solutions.
Yeah. We should not fool around also with the idea of scale and the importance.
Scale.
Scale.
Yeah.
This we will definitely remember and address later in the conversation. Thank you so much, Oskar Korkman, for this insightful presentation. And the report on this study, the stuff we want, can be found on the web page of Design Forum Finland, and also you can access it at our web page in the story about this event. We will now take a little pause. Let's see how long we do it. What would be a good time? Just checking a bit the time. Let's take a pause of 10 minutes. So at 9:40 approximately, we will continue. But stay tuned for more. Welcome back. We are here at Design Museum at the What If Alternative Futures exhibition. My name is Kati Lindrus and I'm project manager of Finnish Design Info. I'm happy to host this conversation on design in the non-material world. Don't worry about some sounds because we are indeed in an exhibition, so they are building some stuff up, but that belongs to the story. We had some fantastic insights just a moment ago from Mr. Oskar Korkman about the Stuff in Flux study. And warmly recommend you to read the Stuff We Want report that you can find on Design Forum website and also on Finnish Design Info website. But now we will, because of the importance of creating through conversation actually understanding about the things that we are talking about, we have invited a fantastic panel here, and you will hear quite diverse angles to the topic that we are talking about, and hopefully a healthy debate. Let's see what happens. So we will have here Idilka Siuulosoi. She's an associate professor at Aalto, and we should tell a little bit more about the aspect how she is relating to sustainability and systems change. Then Matti Jänkälä, student of architecture from Aalto, but most importantly from the collective You Tell Me. And this is also something we will hear more about and how it is relating to the topic here. And then we have Susanna Björklund, who is a senior lecturer and a foresight specialist at Lab University of Applied Sciences, and also like a foresight specialist working very much in the fields of fashion and design. We are very pleased to have you here, and also want to thank our partners ArcInfo and Fashion Finland for helping us to choose such a fantastic group of people. And I notice also that we have created a little bit of a Christmas theme with our colors here. It works really well. So first, let's have a little round of presenting of your angles. So can you tell a little bit about how you work at Aalto University with the topic of sustainable transition? Sure.
Thank you. Thank you also for inviting me, and thank you, Oskar, for a fantastic presentation. I'm a sustainability scientist and a design researcher, so I'm a hybrid academic. And my research, also teaching and consulting work, deals with long-term large systemic societal transformations towards sustainable, post-carbon, resilient and just futures. But I look at it from a design and innovation point of view, and I'm particularly interested in urban transformations and also transformative innovation in context of business.
Right.
And I lead a research group called NODOS, and it's a very diverse research group, but what kind of joins us is that we are looking at long-term systemic change through different design-related empirical contexts, essentially. Yeah.
Fantastic. So it really you combine really the different aspects of sustainability, also connecting to what needs to happen in the society. Things are indeed not living in isolation. Then Matti, can you tell a little bit about the collective, especially in your approach?
Yes, so I'm also from Aalto University. I'm graduating as an architect this December, and
congratulations.
Yes, I'm about to present my thesis about how to prolong the lifespan of the 1970s residential buildings in Finland and how to preserve that built heritage for the future generations. And I'm one of the founding members of the You Tell Me collective, and our collective is a collective of young architects, and we're working on a paradigm change in the field of construction, and especially trying to find a way to practice architecture in a sustainable way within the planetary boundaries and in a much more fair way. And in our work we try to kind of open up the discussion also outside the field of construction, so also to kind of citizens, locals, people who have a stake in the built environment but are not necessarily professionals. So we've done like discussion sessions, different influencing campaigns and so forth. So also today's discussions today's topics are something that I've been working on personally, and we've been working as the collective.
Yeah. So setting up from really from the next generation of architects, it's fantastic to get this quite bold approach also, because I can imagine that we will talk soon about it. How much is it sought after in the market? You are basically breaking boundaries here also and creating perhaps totally new form of working as an architect. Nice to have you here. Then we have Susanna. Can you tell a little bit about your approach to working also in the field of education, but also with the topics that we are addressing today?
Yes, thank you for inviting me as well, and nice to meet all these talented people here. And I work on many different disciplines in a way. My first profession was I was a fashion designer, and then I wanted to look deeper into where trends come from, went back to university, and so I'm a trend analyst and a futures thinker these days. I'm a senior lecturer at Lab Muotoiluinstituutti, so I supervise thesis work and teach also futures research, and then I'm together with some EU projects thinking of how education should be renewed and things like that. And on top of that, I work as a speaker in Finland, abroad. I'm a journalist, I write, and I'm interested in design, of course. That's my core love. But I'm also interested in societal change, megatrends, weak signals, and how all of that, and sustainability, of course, and how all of that reflects in the design world, and how it mirrors actually what's happening, what's going to happen in the society in the near future.
Right. Fantastic to have you three. As I think became obvious, this is really actually a really brilliant combination also to have you here. And I think to share to the spectators, the emphasis of education is indeed what we wanted to bring out, because we really want to talk about that. At the moment we're actually educating the professionals who will be right in the middle of this transition. So this is where we have to really now be sharp and focus on. So the word sustainable transition, big word. I want to start with a very big question as well, because why not? Let's just jump into it. So can you identify from your work and your insight one or even three key drivers that are now really making that transition, pushing it forward, making it a must? What are those drivers? First, Eva.
Yes, very big question.
Kind of.
I think, now that after 60 years of environmental movement, finally, climate change and sustainability issues, resource issues, all of these are not marginally discussed in society anymore. They are the mainstream. I think it's very important. We are seeing business coalitions, city coalitions forming. So in that sense, for me, that's a very big indicator that something big is changing in society. Two, as we are educators and researchers, I also would like to mention the thinking in academic world about, how should be as academic institutions in this new, not so new, but very challenging context is very important, because then it kind of brings to surface discussions on, okay, how do we enable collaboration? How do we educate our students so that they are able to collaborate, etc. So that for me is also very important. Not necessarily specific to sustainability, but it is very relevant to sustainability-related transitions. And the third is, I would like to both acknowledge and also encourage youth movements. So future generations, as in people, younger than probably 30, I would consider, and also all of those who have not born yet, they are going to be living in a world that's going to be much more challenging than now. Yes. So it's wonderful to see that there is this responsibility taking by youth, and I do see that as a big indicator, because on one hand, I think street activism is super important, but on the other hand, it is an indication that these people are also voting, so they can influence the political situation. So those are the three that I would like to mention about.
Brilliant. Matti, you through the collective you have set up, where, like, you tell me, I've read some articles and also from mainstream media, where you quite directly challenged how you are educated. So how do you see these drivers, and why do you think it's so important now to indeed challenge the institutions?
Yes, I think definitely education is where everything starts from, and I'll be happy to kind of dive even deeper to that during this conversation. But I think kind of the key questions in architecture right now are: how do we set architectural practice within the planetary boundaries and within an equitable society? And secondly, how do we find a more kind of mutually beneficial way to coexist with what we call now nature at the moment? And then kind of thirdly, how do we achieve all of this with what already exists without meaning kind of without architecture of new construction, without architecture of extraction, demolition or exploitation. So how do we kind of use what we have already and then achieve this better future? I think those are the key questions we have to answer.
And indeed, construction industry has a huge impact on the carbon footprint, of course. So, do you see that the connection between architects and the construction industry is as fruitful as it could be?
Yeah, I don't think, not at the moment. I think the kind of problems are in the construction industry that it's kind of conservative, it's so risk averse because there's so much money involved. The projects are huge and expensive, so the kind of change is, I think, even slower than in many other fields. So for example, now there is a great focus on new construction because it's more predictable and easy. Yes. You can use standardized building components straight from the factory. They perform in a uniform way. It's easy to predict how everything works. And when you work with renovation and repair projects, everything's a bit more challenging because you can't know everything with such precision and you can't predict things. There's usually surprises, maybe costs go up, and it needs kind of different sort of intimate knowledge of buildings than this kind of distant Excel sheet kind of calculation of the future.
Yeah. The unpredictability. So, Susanna, your ideas of what is now driving change, and indeed maybe also the unpredictable things that we should be aware of.
We are dealing with really huge matters and systemic changes that should get faster, which is very challenging. And then on the other hand, we have, as people, we are change reluctant by origin, and we want comfort, we want things to be easy. And one thing that Oscar was mentioning was joy. And that's how people want joy. So we need to find ways to combine those matters, and yes. It's not easy.
No, we have to, in a way, what you're saying is that we have to understand really in a way, the human condition, our
exactly.
minds. Yeah.
And how everything takes time, and also the fact is that we should really get out of the box of our thinking, because we are looking at things from our bubbles, which is understandable and we can't avoid it. And the bubble we're in is the sustainability bubble, and then we are quite, so many things are happening now all the time, and all the students are really sustainable and activism is on the rise, like you mentioned, and all that. But when you look at the whole globe, I mean, we're still in the beginning.
Exactly. Fashion is also an industry that has a huge impact, and like when you look at what is now happening in that field, what are the drivers there? Because for a long time we have been, of course, there was a whole flux of really this fast fashion and basically creating basically a faster and faster cycle. Is there anything that will, in your opinion, really now challenge that?
Well, of course, consumers,
yeah.
And especially the younger generation, because they want change and they are very sustainable and active. But it's not easy to change the course of a huge ship, and if you have and then when you think of fast fashion, of course it should end and at least change into something else with less and better, of course. But at the same time, it means that so many people get work from fast fashion too. So how is that challenge going to be solved? So these are very important and very, very tough questions. But I think there's so many nice new innovations and there's much more knowledge, and that's what we need. We need transparency and much more knowledge.
Right, yes. Idil, you also very much indeed the whole systemic structure around how change can happen, and this is all the time the thing that we somehow it's very difficult from in public discussion to understand that how far are we actually from those goals? We are setting these certain goals, but how far are we from it from our structural point of view? Just not a long time ago, I was reading about the construction industry, how difficult it is actually in just by following the legislation that we have is to be sustainable. So where do you see this stage of preparedness where we are, and if you would systemically as a systems analyst really say like, okay, there is an acupuncture point, there we should really start to work, that it would start to resonate, then what would that be?
Well, not to sound not optimistic, I don't think we are anywhere near. What is happening is, I think everything that now has become mainstream public discourse had been, discussed, researched, etc. for the past 60 years. So the kind of it has taken so long and almost, a crisis moment for the need for systemic change has made it to mainstream, discourse. And now we are at a moment when the change needs to happen so fast. Yeah. And that, of course, is very challenging, particularly with references to, for example, climate change or biodiversity or anything that's globally significant, yeah, and influencing every single sector and stakeholder group in society. Because we talk about a massive mobilization, but also we talk about while things change, there's not so much suffering. That's why the term transition, we're not talking about a revolution or overnight change or anything. So it's a huge task at hand. I don't think we are close, but I think we have been learning quite a lot. Mm-hmm. And there is actually a lot of established knowledge, this 60 years of work can be and should be tapped into. So we have a lot of tools, for example, the 4 values that Oscar was talking about, and all of the relevant points in his research to design and innovation. We actually have, established knowledge on how to kind of intervene into behavior change through design. Yeah. We have a lot of established knowledge on material choice. All of that is actually, quite well established, or how do we design for experiences rather than, you know, products?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of knowledge, and that's, I think, is very important. We can tap into that. We don't have to create a whole, you know, whole world of knowledge. But what's, I think, important for us to maybe catch the pace of systemic change that's required is not to look at the next 3 or 5 years,
yeah.
which is what's, you know, generally done both in policy but also in business. We really need to put this moment into the longer term, and think about, okay, what is a desirable, sustainable, post-carbon, just world that we may collectively want or can live with?
Yes.
And then use that normative vision to come back to our design, innovation, and business decisions. And I don't think we are close in, you know, making systemic change happen. But on the other hand, it's not also only up to us, because systems have correcting, you know, behavior. So one of the also very important questions is, how do we manage the coming decades so that we are ready for the crisis ahead, and you know, we're ready for a lot of disruptions that we may not be able to imagine at the moment, and how do we do that without getting into, you know, societal collapse or huge conflict moments, etc. I think that's the work that we really need to think about.
Yes, that's brilliant. Matti, this preparedness, you are now graduating and setting up, Idio was here describing about basically a field where your profession has to do with crisis management and basically really dealing with very big disruptions. So how prepared do you see yourself as a starting professional?
I think
for these questions.
Yeah, I think, of course, there's a lot of questions, and still, I think my own future is kind of open. Kind of, how can I find a way to practice architecture in a way that I feel that I'm not destroying the world in the process? Like, I still haven't personally solved that, and I'm not maybe in the position of power to really make those big changes to change the industry. But I am optimistic that I can do what I do well and aim to do like my part properly. And I think kind of what gives me hope is that like there are these big challenges that we need to tackle, but I think for the most part in construction we actually have the solutions already. Kind of we know what needs to be done, and we kind of have the means to do it. What we lack is this willpower, and kind of it's the legislation that's preventing it, it's the practices of the industry that's preventing it. But for example, in terms of new construction, I would kind of contend that we actually in Finland for the most part have the buildings we need already. Kind of new construction is much more justifiable in global south, where you actually lack this like vital infrastructure for the society, but we have built that already. It's now more of a means, or it's more about kind of redistributing those spaces and that building stock that we have already. And also like for sustainable new construction, we have already tried and tested methods of like clay construction, massive timber, etc., or massive brick walls that we know that can last for centuries. But it's just that in this like through the modern movement, for example, we jumped into these new ways of construction that are maybe not as durable. And also we can harness these natural processes to work for our benefit there. We can use like the power of the sun or the kind of the natural airflows to ventilate and cool buildings. There is already research on that. We can also kind of replace our mechanical rainwater management systems with just planting trees or leaving non-paved surfaces in cities. So I think we have quite good like non-technical, in a way, we don't need those new technologies to solve those problems. We have those solutions already.
Yes. We don't need a killer app.
Exactly.
Concerning weak signals, we are talking very much here about, of course, about the urgency that we have to face. But like you mentioned also that came out in Oscar's keynote, is that we are working very much on the motivation of people. And we have to, in a way, also be able to create a narrative instead of just a dystopian narrative, also an optimistic narrative. So, Susanna, about the weak signals that you think we should pay more attention to and maybe even get inspired by, like what do you see in the fields that you study or where you teach or something like that, you think that this is something that we should pay more attention to, this shows a bit the way?
Well, my job is to look for change in everything, what I see, whether it's the aging society or whatever, and then you see Leo Grande film, 63-year-old Emma Thompson naked. That's a change. That's something that you might not have seen 10 years ago on a feature film. And so changes are happening all the time, and you can actually learn up to a point to spot them. And I think that's also for everybody working in also any field, that's what you should be doing.
Yeah.
Looking into change, seeing what sort of interesting innovations there are in any field. Because one thing also, I think that people are very aware of what's happening in their own field. And if you're in a business, they know what's happening, who's the rivalry.
Yep.
But I think to look into the future, you really have to start looking broader and checking out everything what's happening everywhere.
Exactly.
Where the change is, and then communicate it.
Yes.
That's what we need. And I think also one big challenge is the fact that there's usually not just one truth in anything. And same applies with sustainability. It's like, on the other hand, we should all start driving electric cars. But on the other hand, you know, you need cobalt, and that's dug under not very nice circumstances and whatever, and you know, we need new materials for producing electric cars and whatever. So it's like, so I think that a lot of people would do more if they sort of got specific information more that what could be done and what makes a difference.
Right.
In their own tiny life.
Yeah, exactly.
Electric cars is a major mistake that I think the society is making at the moment, and maybe to exemplify what I was saying before, like vision and then making decisions on, you know, what are we actually going to create, you know, bring into existence into the material world. So I really like this mobility system transformation opportunity that we have at the moment that we're absolutely not using.
Yes.
As an example, so at the moment, huge disruption in relation to, you know, how we move about and how stuff moves about. Emerging technologies, a lot of capacity in relation to those emerging technologies to really sense, you know, a very complex system in real time. And of course, the mobility system has huge sustainability impact. And all we can think of is electric cars. Well, actually, it's a huge mistake, because a car is a paradigm of mobility. It's not the paradigm.
Yep.
Individual car ownership has to go out of the door, but by way of like pushing electric cars, we are creating new lock-ins. We're not really changing infrastructure. We're not really changing behavior. We are only patching, you know, putting a sanitary band on a very big wound. While we can actually think about, okay, we have all of these opportunities coming together, what is a sustainable mobility system look like?
Exactly.
And then thinking about what policies are needed, what products, what services, you know. So I'm with you on that. It's a huge mistake, I think, that the society is making at the moment. And these kind of mistakes are very difficult to, turn around down the track. So,
exactly. But of course, it makes a difference if you live in the countryside where there's no public transport compared to somebody living in the center of Helsinki, for instance. So people also have different needs and...
I agree. I agree. And reimagining a mobility system, I don't mean that we should reimagine only for the urban. Mm-hmm. And also there will be a need for individually owned vehicles, no doubt about that. But we don't, all of us, need to own own a car, or some families even have, a car per person.
Yeah, I agree.
So that can change. We have the opportunity, but we're not taking that opportunity, and that's for me very, it's like, come on, society.
Yeah, exactly. Something that I've also been thinking about a lot is metaverse.
Yep.
How that's supposed to solve so many things, going digital and whatever, but that uses a hell of a lot of energy as well.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
I read that one NFT is same as driving a petrol car for 800 kilometers or something. So.
Yeah,
exactly.
Agree.
So again, there's never one truth.
Exactly. Yeah. This is a very important aspect of this conversation, because I think what we very often look for is that we looked at the current system and then we try to improve each node separately, when we actually should look at the connection and start to work on that connection factor, which is where the improvement, which means that we have to design totally differently. Now we get to the education, right? So now we get to the point if we are actually preparing our society through education to not to indeed design the electric car as a metaphor for that problem of looking too one-sidedly, or if we are able to see opportunities. So Matti, now let's hear it. What is the point that you with the collective wanted also, and have wanted about how we should really see education, and also have a more disruptive discussion around it?
Our whole collective started from this kind of crisis that we realized that we're about to graduate, and we really felt that we hadn't gotten the tools needed to practice architecture in a sustainable way, and we started the collective in a way as a supplementary education, that we would kind of teach each other and try to find researchers to come talk with us, and kind of share experts to share their knowledge, and kind of find this kind of knowledge that was out there but wasn't maybe in our curriculum. But luckily, now even in a couple of recent years, things have changed and the curriculum has changed, and I am hopeful that there's still a lot to be done, and Aalto needs to be much more ambitious, but I think it can be done. And I think maybe the biggest issues in architecture is that architects are still kind of educated as these auteurs who create something new. They create a work of art, their own piece, and there's this great desire with architects, even with myself, to kind of leave a mark or kind of a monument to prove that you did something. But what is architecture where you wouldn't even leave a trace of yourself, and how do we kind of cope with that? Do we value that kind of architecture if it's just taking care of an existing building or existing environment? And coming back to what you two have said earlier in this discussion, I think key questions are, I think architects should be educated as critical thinkers. Right now, architects are kind of trained to solve an existing brief or an assignment, whereas I think architects should really question the brief itself and kind of try to identify what are the actual questions that need to be solved. I think design has much more of this thinking, that you try to discover what the client actually wants versus what they're asking. So I think this is something we would need in architecture, and also this cross-disciplinary cooperations, that architecture is never done alone. It's many people involved and with different expertise. So I think we should be a bit more humble and kind of know what we don't know and turn to the experts when we need to hear.
Yeah. It's also an identity question, what is your position in what you are doing? Skill sets. What skill sets do you think designers, also in the field of fashion and design? Do you think they will need much more?
Well, understanding the whole design process, and when it used to be form follows function, especially in Finland, forget that. Of course, form follows function, but we also, designers need to think of the pre-life of if say they're designing a product, pre-life of the product, what materials to use, how to use them. They need to think about the lifespan of the product, and then they need to think about the afterlife of the product. Can it be recycled? Can it be taken apart? What needs to be done? And then, of course, all the sustainability issues, sure, that's not a trend, and that's like the main core ingredient of a design process. But then, again, I point into the aesthetics. Nobody buys an ugly product just because it's sustainable. So there needs to be the desirability. Right. There needs to be something that why you want that product. Yes. Then I also feel that in the design process you should think about things like communication again. How you communicate what you're doing, and then adding services, because it used to be so that you have service providers and you had product manufacturers, but now I feel that you need to have that within the package. So what sort of services do you have? Repair services, rental services, does the brand sell their own second-hand services? Recycling services, all these different things. That's the whole package of what I feel a design process should be. And of course a designer should be aware of all that. But then again, if the manufacturer doesn't want to invest, doesn't want to make changes, a designer cannot do it on their own.
Exactly, and here we come to the industrial scale that Oskar Korkman was talking about. So we are not here a little bit noodling somewhere only. We really have to understand that to have an impact, we have to address the big corporations, the parties that might be sometimes considered as the enemy side. We have to make enemies our best friends. Ideal skill sets.
Right.
Yeah.
So first of all, maybe I would like to underline that we talk about design as if it's a monolithic one thing, but of course there are designs.
Yes.
There are levels of design from two-dimensional material to three-dimensional material, all the way up to designing strategies and environments and systems. So I think it's really important to also acknowledge that a very important aspect of design work is going to be material and has to be material. We cannot deny that because we are material beings, so there's always going to be a need for designing material stuff. And it's really important that we do that with an understanding of sustainability, etc. But what is coming through quite strongly, and this is not only for designer education, but I think 21st century education skill set fundamentals cover systems thinking, futures thinking for almost all professional areas as very important. Because without systems thinking, you are not really going to be able to form collaborative relationships that you need to be in, given that the problems we're trying to solve or the world that we are trying to design within, it cannot be done only with being a designer. So in that sense, those two are very, very fundamental, I think, and very important. And beyond that, I cannot agree more about the humbleness, because I grew up professionally during the star architects and star designers time. Luckily now we're seeing among our students, you know, not an interest at all about being a star architect or a star designer. That's wonderful. But that humbleness, and also remembering that we are never a designer, but we're a co-designer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also, design is a distributed competence throughout society. So, you know, as professional designers, what do we bring onto the table of this, you know, co-design kind of context? Very important. And remembering that sometimes the best solutions come not from engineers or designers, but from the users. And
right.
There's a lot of research on, you know, in energy transitions. Actually, my colleague has done user innovation in energy transition. So also remembering that, I mean, we hold a knowledge body, and that's very important professionally. But then remembering that, you know, design in the context of 21st century cannot be, in my opinion, design, but it has to be co-design.
Yes.
And it has to be, you know, with all of the stakeholders involved, including non-human stakeholders. So we're
Yes.
talking about multi-species
Yes.
sustainability increasingly more.
Exactly. Beautiful and important. I would like to ask my colleague if there are some questions from the chat. Yes, she points out. Let's have some glasses so that I can see something, and I will check out what's being said here. Thank you. The great comment on the bubble and back to privilege. When we talk about drivers and driving, how do we motivate the so-called passengers? This is maybe not a specific question to any one of you, but I think it is about who is leading and who has to follow. How should we think that? Should we rethink that?
I think we should try to keep positive, because we can create the future, partly, all of us, second by second. And I was in a futures conference a couple of years back, and Ivana Milosevic, a futurist, was saying that why is it that every single time in the media, when you visualize the future, it's only skyscrapers and flying cars? Why not green nature and happy people?
Yep.
And so we can't lose hope. So I think we should also, in this challenging situation, try to dig and bring out and communicate the positive things and innovations that are happening, and to give us hope and to push us to do more.
I think this, how do we motivate passengers? I believe passenger is used metaphorically or allegorically. So those actors in society who either are not interested or maybe, you know, would like, or due to their vested interests, they might not a certain type of action, but a certain other type of action. It's a very important question, and that also, in my opinion, relates to democracy. Mm-hmm. It relates to justice, and it relates to power.
Yes.
And privilege, of course. So how do we motivate them? Well, I don't have a definitive answer to that. But I think what we need to be very sensitive to when we talk about these, you know, systems change and visions and this and that the earlier question about who is the we was really important.
Yes.
So we really need to be reflective about who do I actually represent?
Yes.
You know, and when when we collectively develop a vision, is it the vision of everyone? Probably not.
Yep.
So who is excluded and how can we include them, etc.? I think these are very important questions without simple answers. But I also think that there are ways to motivate at least some of the currently passive passengers. One way I think is, for example, this exhibition, like experiential futures. Futures can be very abstract for people to relate to. So then, emerging approaches in, I think, in also at the intersection of design and futures is very potentially very fruitful for getting people to start to relate to futures that are going to be very, influential for themselves directly.
Right.
And I think once that happens, more people will be motivated to think, to act, and to join into societal discussion.
This is really again a systemic change that is needed, because perhaps we don't have those tools of democracy at the moment at our hand that we will need for that. Just as a conclusion, and also Matteo, please, if you have some remarks about, that you want to add to that question. We had an idea of pointing out this design in the non-material world. So some almost like sketchy ideas about, well, what does it then look like? Where do you see, because as one of the things that we think design as a broad discipline can do is actually to create something that people can indeed have a discussion around. And that's the beauty of the power of creating a physical or some kind of visual presentation. So I would like to ask that from you first.
I would actually like to go back to the form follows function.
Yes.
Kind of this motto of especially like the modern movement and kind of maybe our like design background in Finland, and kind of the interesting thing about kind of transitioning from that to circular economy and reuse. In reuse is actually the reverse, that the motto is function follows form. So rather than, for example, in architecture, rather than adapting the built environment to our changing needs, that we always replace buildings when our needs and spatial programs change, we would rather kind of adapt our activities to the built environment that exists. So we would kind of see an existing space and try to fit our functions in it. And I don't know what it would mean in fashion. Would it be kind of finding a garment that exists and kind of then discovering a use for it, or something like that? But I think we can build a better future using what already exists, and then it's much more about what we talked about already, about this kind of different kind of quality of life, maybe having more this focus on care and giving people more free time to take care of their environment and each other. Maybe that would be the better future.
Yes.
Susanna. When you talk about fashion, of course, when you have garments that you love and you wear them forever, and then that's the best way.
Yeah.
That they last, because and it doesn't mean that they have to be boring. They can be really wild if that's your taste. But if they are good quality and you wear them forever, then it's great. And it doesn't matter if they were second-hand when you bought them or new. And I don't believe, by the way, that, again, it's going to be just one truth, that in the future everybody is just going to be buying second-hand and you shouldn't, and you're a terrible person if you buy something new. I don't think it works that way. But I'm really, really happy that the mainstream has, it's not something anybody, it's okay to buy second-hand, and it's encouraged, and it's great. And like Oskar said, we need more ways of having specific places to buy specific second-hand products. So that's made easy, and
designing that network is the task. To conclude, Idil, your idea, what does the design in the non-material world look like?
Maybe I'm not going to give a definitive answer, but the guideline that I'm working with. So I see this emerging talk about circular economy, second-hand use, repair, care. These are wonderful, very needed. They're all, tools for us to learn and move forward. But as a systems thinker, I would like to acknowledge one of my, I think, main influences, Donella Meadows, and her framework of leverage points. So the most potent leverage point that she talks about is transcending paradigms. Before that is power to change the paradigms. So in that sense, I think we should keep in mind that our knowledge is renewing every day. Yes. So what we know today as to be the cutting edge knowledge or the truth is not going to be tomorrow. So we should be very open for updating ourselves on a quite fast pace. Yep. And be ready to change our mind. I think that's really important. So that's the main leverage point for me, the transcending paradigms, not sticking with one idea. This is how we're going to be sustainable or post-carbon or etc. But always asking, is that so? Do I have new knowledge? What does that mean for the problem I have at hand? So.
Absolutely brilliant. So let's remember to ask what if I'm actually wrong, and what would happen if I would rethink and redesign the way I'm doing things. This has been a true pleasure to host this conversation. Thank you, Ida. Thank you, Matti. Thank you, Susanna. And we will also for you to share all these fantastic insights with your friends. We're happy to tell that we are going to publish also this morning as a recording, also in parts. So please do share the messages. There have been some really fantastic insights, and we will keep you posted on finishdesigninfo.fi. And please also subscribe to the newsletter to stay up to date, and have a wonderful December, end of the year, with big dreams about future. Thank you so much.